Today we return to the world of Sherlock Holmes and Watson. In the previous story, we saw Holmes at his most brilliant in reading clues no one else could see and solving a murder that left the police completely lost. But in this second adventure, we see another side of him, the darker side of a mind that cannot stand being idle. Our story begins back at 221B Baker Street, where Holmes is not working on a case. He is simply bored. And for most people, boredom means staring out the window, reading the newspaper, or taking a walk. For Holmes, boredom is almost dangerous. His mind needs a problem. It needs pressure. It needs a mystery sharp enough to cut through the fog. Without that, his brilliant brain starts turning against him. So, in one of the darkest details of the Holmes stories, he reaches for what he calls his 7% solution. Yes, cocaine. Now, this is Victorian London, so the rules are very different from today. Cocaine was not treated with the same alarm or legal restriction that it is now. But Watson is a doctor and he knows exactly what he is watching. His closest friend damaging himself just to escape boredom. So Watson does what any decent friend would do. He argues, he warns him. He tries to make Holmes see sense. Holmes, of course, is not in the mood to be saved. To him, this is not a moral issue. It is a problem of mental energy. When there is no case, no criminal mind to chase, no chain of clues to follow, life becomes unbearable. Holmes does not see himself as an ordinary man. He sees himself as a specialized instrument, a consulting detective, the only one of his kind, surrounded by police officers who mean well but usually need him to do the actual thinking. And just to make sure Watson remembers how extraordinary he is, Holmes casually mentions that a French detective has been translating his research papers into French, because apparently even Sherlock Holmes's footnotes deserve an international audience. Then Holmes decides to prove that, chemicals or not, his mind is still working perfectly. He looks at Watson and casually says that Watson has been to the Wigmore Street post office that morning to send a telegram. Watson is stunned. He has told Holmes nothing. He has not mentioned the post office. He has not written a letter in front of him. As far as Watson knows, Holmes has no way of knowing where he has been. But for Holmes, it is painfully obvious. Watson's boots are marked with reddish mud, the kind found near the roadworks on Wigmore Street. On Watson's desk, Holmes has noticed fresh stamps, but no unfinished letter. So if Watson went to that area, and if he did not write a letter, then the most likely reason was a telegram. No magic, no mind reading, just tiny facts arranged in the right order. Holmes is very pleased with himself. Watson, less so. Because being Sherlock Holmes' friend means living with a man who can turn your shoes into evidence, and your morning errands into a public demonstration. So Watson decides to test him properly. Something older. Something personal. Something Holmes could not possibly know in advance. He takes out a pocket watch and places it on the table. "Tell me about this," Watson says. It is a family heirloom. Personal, private, and full of history. Watson expects Holmes to fail, or at least to guess badly enough that Watson can finally knock him down from that very comfortable throne of genius. Instead, Holmes looks at the watch and begins reading a dead man's life. He starts with the simple details. The initials on the back are HW. The watch is expensive, worth around 50 guineas, and it is old enough to belong to the previous generation. Since Watson's father is already dead, and since the initials match the Watson family name, Holmes concludes that the watch once belonged to Watson's elder brother. So far, Watson can accept it. That is clever, but not impossible. Then Holmes goes further. He notices that the watch has been badly treated. The case is covered in small scratches, the kind made when a valuable object is thrown carelessly into a pocket with coins, keys, and other hard things. To Holmes, that says something about the owner. This was not a careful man. He had once possessed money and position, but he did not have steady habits. He was careless with valuable things and probably careless with himself. Then Holmes turns to the marks around the keyhole where the watch was wound. There are many tiny scratches there, as if the key had missed the hole again and again. A steady hand would not leave marks like that. A trembling hand would. And now the picture becomes darker. Holmes concludes that Watson's brother drank heavily. Not once or twice, but often enough for it to leave a pattern. The watch has become a record of him. His unsteady hands, his carelessness, his decline. Then Holmes points out the pawnshop marks inside the case. The watch had been pawned more than once, which means its owner moved between short periods of money and desperate periods of debt. Piece by piece, Holmes builds the life of a man he never met. A man who inherited something valuable, wasted his chances, fell into drink, sold or pawned what he had, and died in ruin. For a moment, Watson is furious. This is not a game anymore. This is his brother, his family, his private grief. He accuses Holmes of somehow digging into his past just to show off. But Holmes does not argue emotionally. He simply explains each step. The initials, the age, the scratches, the pawn marks, the unsteady hand. And that is what makes it worse. Because Watson realizes Holmes has not cheated. He has not researched anything. He has only looked closely enough to see what everyone else would miss. The room falls into an uncomfortable silence. Holmes has won the challenge, but not in a way that feels pleasant. He has proved his genius by opening an old wound. Then, just when the air in Baker Street feels too heavy to breathe, a knock at the door breaks the tension. The visitor is Miss Mary Morstan, a young governess with a quiet manner, clear composure, and a problem strange enough to wake Holmes up instantly. For Holmes, the boredom is over. For Watson, something else begins. Because from the moment Mary enters the room, he is immediately struck by her. He tries to stay focused, but it is already obvious that this is not going to be easy for him. Mary's story begins 10 years earlier. Her father, Captain Arthur Morstan, had served in India with the British Army. In late 1878, he returned to London and sent word for Mary to meet him at the Langham Hotel. She went there expecting a reunion. Instead, she found nothing. Her father had vanished without explanation. He left no message, no destination, and no clear trail. One moment he was back in England, and the next he had disappeared. For 4 years, the mystery went nowhere. Then, on May 4th, 1882, something very strange happened. An advertisement appeared in the Times asking for Mary Morstan's current address. On the advice of her employer, Mrs. Cecil Forrester, Mary replied. Soon afterwards, she received a small package in the mail. Inside was a single pearl, rare, beautiful, and clearly valuable. The following year, another pearl arrived, then another, and another. In total, she has received 6 of them, always anonymously, one each year with no explanation. Now, the mystery has taken a new turn. Mary has received a letter from the unknown sender asking her to come to a meeting that very evening. The letter says she has been wronged and promises justice. It also gives her permission to bring 2 friends, but specifically warns her not to bring the police. Faced with that combination of generosity, secrecy, and danger, Mary has come straight to Baker Street. Holmes accepts the case at once. He tells Mary that he and Watson will accompany her, and once she leaves to prepare for the evening, Holmes begins digging into the details. He checks the newspaper records and quickly finds the first solid connection in the case. Captain Morstan, it turns out, had a close associate in London, Major John Sholto. Then Holmes notices something even more important. Major Sholto died in late April of 1882, just about a week before Mary received the first pearl. To Holmes, that timing is too exact to be a coincidence. His theory forms almost immediately. Someone connected to Major Sholto learned a secret after the Major's death, a secret involving Captain Morstan and Mary. Ever since then, that person has been sending her pearls, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps as partial compensation, and perhaps as a way of easing a conscience that never quite goes quiet. Watson can only watch in admiration as Holmes pulls structure out of what looked like complete chaos. A missing officer, a dead friend, anonymous pearls, a secret benefactor. For Holmes, the scattered pieces are already beginning to lock together. That evening, a carriage arrives to collect them and take them to the appointed meeting. As they ride through the dim London streets, Watson does his best to remain calm in Mary's presence, while Holmes stays focused on the case. Then Mary reveals one more piece of evidence, something she found among her father's belongings after his disappearance. It is a curious document, the floor plan of a building, marked with a strange symbol. Beside it are 4 names: Jonathan Small, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar. Together they call themselves the Sign of 4. The carriage rolls on through the thick London fog until it stops outside a strange little house. Holmes, Watson, and Mary step out into the night, and the door opens before them. Inside they are led to the man who has been sending Mary pearls from the dark for 6 long years, Thaddeus Sholto. Thaddeus is not exactly the heroic type. He is small, nervous, balding, and constantly worried about his health. A cold draft seems to frighten him as much as a loaded pistol. His rooms are filled with rich carpets, strange decorations, tiger skins, and the heavy smell of incense, as if he has built himself a private little kingdom of anxiety and expensive taste. But strange as he is, Thaddeus has the missing piece of the story. He tells Mary what happened to her father. 10 years earlier, Captain Arthur Morstan returned from India and went to visit Thaddeus's father, Major John Sholto. The two men had shared a dangerous secret from their time overseas, a hidden treasure, enormous in value, which had somehow come into their hands. But when Morstan arrived in London, the reunion turned into an argument. The treasure had not been divided fairly, and Morstan demanded his share. Then everything went wrong. Morstan, already in poor health, collapsed during the quarrel. As he fell, he struck his head and died there in Sholto's house. Major Sholto panicked. He was terrified that no one would believe the death was an accident, so instead of reporting it, he hid Morstan's body and kept the treasure for himself. And from that moment on, the treasure became a curse. Years later, when Major Sholto was dying, his guilt finally caught up with him. He called his two sons, Thaddeus and Bartholomew, to his bedside and confessed the truth. He told them that Mary Morstan had been wronged and that she deserved her father's share of the fortune. But just as he was about to reveal where the treasure was hidden, he looked toward the window and froze. A terrifying face was staring in at him from the darkness. The shock was too much. Major Sholto died before he could finish the confession. His sons searched outside and found only one strange clue beneath the window, a distinctive footprint. Then, by morning, Sholto's room had been ransacked. On his chest lay a piece of paper with 4 words written on it, the sign of 4. That was when Thaddeus and Bartholomew knew their father's secret had not died with him. Someone else knew about the treasure. Someone else wanted it. Thaddeus explains that he and his brother were the ones sending Mary the pearls. They did not know where the full treasure was, but they knew Mary had been cheated, so the pearls were meant as a small act of repayment. Thaddeus wanted to go further and give Mary everything she was owed. Bartholomew did not. He was colder, more practical, and far more possessive. To him, the treasure belonged to the Sholtos now, and Mary Morstan was an inconvenient problem. Then, only a few days ago, Bartholomew finally found it. He had been measuring Pondicherry Lodge, the family estate, with obsessive precision. The outside of the house was taller than the rooms inside could explain. That meant there had to be a hidden space somewhere above them. After breaking through the ceiling, Bartholomew discovered a secret attic, and inside it, the treasure chest, roughly £500,000. In Victorian London, that is not just money. That is power, status, escape, and temptation all locked inside one box. More than enough to change several lives. More than enough to get someone killed. Thaddeus insists that Mary must receive her rightful share. He leads Holmes, Watson, and Mary back out into the cold night, and together they set off for Pondicherry Lodge, where Bartholomew is waiting with the treasure. But as they approach the estate, the house is dark and strangely silent. No welcome, no movement, no sign that anyone inside is expecting them. The group reaches the gates of the estate, but they are stopped by the guard, McMurdo. He does not want to let anyone in at that hour, and he certainly does not look impressed by Thaddeus Sholto's nervous explanations. Then Holmes steps forward and handles the situation in the most Holmes way possible. Not by announcing himself as a detective, but by reminding McMurdo that they once fought 3 rounds together in a boxing match. That does the trick. McMurdo recognizes him, the gates open, and the group enters the dark grounds of Pondicherry Lodge. The house itself feels wrong before they even reach the door. Most of it is silent and black, with only one light burning inside. And then, before anyone can properly knock, a scream cuts through the night. The housekeeper, Mrs. Burnstone, is in a state of complete panic. She has looked through the keyhole of Bartholomew Sholto's room and seen something so horrifying that she can barely explain it. Thaddeus is terrified. Mary is shaken. Watson is alert. Holmes naturally becomes very calm. They hurry to Bartholomew's door. It is locked from the inside. Holmes looks through the keyhole, examines the door, and then forces it open. And suddenly, the treasure hunt becomes a murder case. Bartholomew Sholto is sitting dead in his room, caught in the pale moonlight. His body is stiff. His face is twisted into a horrible fixed grin, as if death itself has left a cruel joke behind. On the table lies a note with the words they have already seen before. The sign of 4. And the Agra treasure is gone. Watson examines the body and finds the detail that explains the grotesque expression. Just above Bartholomew's ear is a tiny dark thorn almost too small to notice. It has been poisoned. The toxin has killed him quickly and left his facial muscles locked in that unnatural smile. So now Holmes has two mysteries at once. First, who killed Bartholomew Sholto? Second, how did the killer escape from a room that was locked and bolted from the inside? At first glance, it seems impossible. The door was secured, the window was bolted. There is no obvious way in or out. But Holmes does not care about what seems impossible. He cares about what the evidence says. And the evidence says someone was outside that window. On the windowsill, Holmes finds a muddy boot print. Beside it is something even stranger, a round mark, the kind that could be left by the end of a wooden leg. That gives him one half of the killer's identity. A man with a wooden leg was here, but that only makes the puzzle stranger. A man with a wooden leg could not easily climb up the outside of Pondicherry Lodge. He could not slip silently across the roof. And he certainly could not bolt the window again from the outside after escaping. Which means he was not alone. Holmes begins to see the shape of it. The wooden-legged man had an accomplice, someone small, agile, and able to move where an ordinary man could not. Someone who may have entered from above, through the roof or attic space, and helped bring the wooden-legged man into the room. Then Inspector Athelney Jones arrives from Scotland Yard, and the entire investigation immediately becomes louder. Jones is confident, energetic, and completely ready to solve the case in the simplest possible way. To him, the locked window proves nobody could have entered from outside, so the footprints on the sill are dismissed as irrelevant. The missing treasure, the strange thorn, the sign of foreknote, the wooden leg mark, all of it becomes secondary to one convenient fact. Thaddeus Sholto knew about the treasure and came to the house that night, so Jones does what Holmes expected him to do. He arrests Thaddeus. It is neat, it is easy, it is also almost certainly wrong. Thaddeus is horrified. Mary is distressed. Watson can see the absurdity of it. But Jones is satisfied because he has found a suspect who looks useful on paper, even if the actual crime makes no sense. Holmes, meanwhile, is already moving past him. Holmes knows the real killer is not Thaddeus. The treasure was taken by the wooden-legged man and his strange accomplice. And most importantly, this locked room was never truly locked to someone who did not need to use the door. While Inspector Jones is busy arresting the most convenient suspect in the building, Holmes turns his attention upward. The answer is not only at the window, it is above Bartholomew Sholto's room. Holmes climbs through the trapdoor into the hidden attic space with Watson close behind him. Up there, the evidence is waiting. A strong rope, coiled and ready, exactly the kind of thing that could have helped pull someone up into the loft. But the stranger clue is on the dusty floorboards. Footprints, small ones, very small ones. They are barely 6 inches long, and at first glance they look almost like the bare feet of a child. Watson is horrified, partly because the idea is disturbing, and partly because it makes no sense. A child could not have helped haul a grown man with a wooden leg through a trapdoor. The whole thing feels physically impossible, but Holmes does not panic. He drops down and studies the prints more carefully. These are not a child's feet. The toes are spread wide apart, shaped by a life without ordinary European shoes. Then Holmes connects that detail with the poisoned thorn used to kill Bartholomew. The method is unusual, the weapon is unusual, and the trail points far beyond London. Holmes concludes that the accomplice is a small, extremely agile man from the Andaman Islands, the same part of the world connected to the old treasure story. He is dangerous not because he is large or strong, but because he can move silently, climb where others cannot, and kill from a distance with poisoned darts. In other words, the locked room was never really locked to him. Holmes follows the tiny footprints across the attic. They lead to a gap where roof tiles have been removed, creating an exit through the top of the house. The escape route is risky but possible. Holmes tested himself, climbing out through the opening and tracing the path across the roof. At one point, he even makes a dangerous jump down toward a water barrel, proving how the killers could have escaped. Then he finds another crucial clue. A small pouch has been dropped on the roof. Inside are more poisoned darts. That changes everything. The killers were in a hurry. They did not leave calmly after a perfect crime. They made a mistake. They left behind the very weapon that links the strange footprints, the poisoned thorn, and the murder of Bartholomew Sholto. But once the trail reaches the ground, the case becomes harder. The clear marks disappear into the dirty, crowded confusion of London streets. Mud, wheels, boots, horses, everything mixes together. For a moment, the trail seems dead, and Holmes hates that. Then Holmes remembers one small detail from the attic. The accomplice stepped in creosote. Creosote is a dark, tar-like chemical used to treat wood. It has a strong smell, and once it gets on your foot, it does not politely disappear just because you walk into the street. A human nose might lose the scent in the open air, especially in London fog and smoke. But Holmes knows someone who can follow it, or rather something, so he sends Watson to Pinchin Lane, a shabby little corner of London, to borrow Toby, the tracking dog who may be their best chance of following the killers through the city. Toby's owner, Mr. Sherman, is not exactly welcoming. He greets Watson with all the warmth of a loaded cannon, and his first instinct is to threaten him with a wet mop. Not the standard reception for a doctor and former army surgeon. But then Watson mentions Sherlock Holmes. Instantly, Sherman changes. The hostility disappears and he becomes much more helpful. Holmes' name clearly carries weight in some very odd places. Sherman hands over Toby, a tracking dog kept in cage number 7, and Watson brings him back to Pondicherry Lodge. Now it is Toby's turn. Holmes gives the dog a strong scent from the creosote trail, and Toby immediately comes alive. Nose down, body forward, he pulls Holmes and Watson across the grounds, through a gap in the garden fence and out into the streets. The chase has officially begun. For a while, Toby performs beautifully. He follows the trail with total confidence, moving away from the heart of London and dragging the 2 men after him. At a crossroads, he pauses just long enough to consider his options. Then he chooses a direction and takes off with fresh determination. Holmes and Watson follow, expecting the trail to lead them closer to the killers. Instead, Toby charges into a busy timber yard and stops proudly beside a large barrel. For one wonderful, humiliating moment, everyone just has to accept what has happened. Toby, the great tracking dog, has not found the murderer. He has found more creosote. And to be fair to Toby, this is not entirely stupid. Creosote is used to treat wood, and a timber yard is full of the smell. To a dog, it must be like trying to follow one perfume bottle through an entire perfume factory. Holmes is not amused, but he also knows the mistake is logical. He takes Toby back to the crossroads and sets him on the other path. This time, the dog catches the right scent again. The trail runs through the city toward the river until at last Toby reaches the edge of the Thames, and there the scent stops. The meaning is clear. The killers did not vanish into thin air. They left by water. Holmes begins questioning people along the wharf and soon finds the next important lead, a boat business run by Mrs. Smith. She explains that her husband, Mordecai Smith, recently took out a steam launch for a very particular customer, a rough-looking man with a wooden leg. The boat is called the Aurora. It is fast, easy to recognize, and painted with a black hull, red trim, and a black funnel marked with a white band. To the police, that might sound like bad news. A fast boat on the Thames could be anywhere by now. But Holmes thinks differently. He asks about the coal supply and quickly sees the problem. The Aurora did not have enough fuel for a long journey, and Mordecai Smith is not the sort of man who would casually waste money buying more unless he absolutely had to. Holmes reaches a new conclusion. The Aurora has probably not left London at all. Jonathan Small, his agile accomplice, and the stolen Agra treasure are somewhere along the Thames. The problem is that the Thames is not a narrow trail. It is a maze of boats, docks, wharves, and hiding places. Searching blindly would waste days. So Holmes calls in one of his most effective resources, the Baker Street Irregulars. These are not official detectives. They are street boys who know London from the ground up. They can move through docks, alleys, yards, and crowded streets without anyone paying much attention. For Holmes, they are perfect scouts. He sends them out to search for the Aurora and report back the moment they find anything. Then comes the worst part of any Holmes investigation. Waiting. Hours pass. The irregulars bring no useful news. The Aurora seems to have vanished, and for Sherlock Holmes, there is almost no punishment worse than sitting still while a case is moving somewhere beyond his reach. He places an advertisement in the newspaper, hoping to draw out information about the boat. Then, unable to endure the silence any longer, he goes into the city himself. Later, back at Baker Street, Inspector Athelney Jones arrives looking far less confident than before. His grand theory about Thaddeus Sholto has collapsed, and he has been forced to release the man he arrested so proudly. Jones is annoyed, embarrassed, and clearly hoping Holmes has something better. While Watson is dealing with this newly humbled inspector, an old sailor wanders into the room. His voice is rough, his manner is strange, and for a moment he seems like just another odd visitor from the London streets. Then the old man drops the act. It is Holmes. He has been working in disguise because Watson's published accounts have made his face a little too familiar to the criminal world. It is a very Sherlock Holmes problem, becoming so famous for catching criminals that criminals start recognizing you first. But the disguise worked. Holmes explains that the irregular's failure was not useless after all. In fact, it gave him the missing idea. If the Aurora was not seen moving on the river, then perhaps it was not on the river at all. Small had hidden the boat in plain sight by taking it into a repair yard and pretending it needed work. Holmes checked the yards himself, found the Aurora, and learned the crucial detail. Jonathan Small is expected to collect it at 8 o'clock that night. Now the trap is set. That evening, Holmes, Watson, and Inspector Jones board a police steam launch and wait in the darkness of the Thames. Right on schedule, the Aurora slips out from the repair yard. The police launch moves after it. The men on the Aurora realize they have been found, and then the river chase begins. This is Victorian action at full speed. No sirens, no engines screaming like a modern chase scene, just coal smoke, churning water, and 2 steam launches racing through the dark. The police boat pushes hard, slowly gaining on the Aurora as it cuts through the Thames. On the deck of the fleeing boat, they finally see them. Jonathan Small with his wooden leg, Tonga, his small and deadly companion, and the terrified boatman, Mordecai Smith, who has clearly realized he picked a very bad night to earn extra money. As the police launch closes in, Tonga raises his blowpipe. That changes everything. One poisoned dart was enough to kill Bartholomew Sholto almost instantly. Holmes and Watson cannot wait to see whether Tonga misses. They fire. Tonga is hit and falls backward into the black water of the Thames. With the chase collapsing around him, the boatman panics and drives the Aurora hard into the muddy riverbank. Jonathan Small jumps over the side and tries to escape on foot. Unfortunately for him, there is one serious flaw in that plan. A wooden leg is not ideal for deep river mud. Small plunges into the muck and immediately gets stuck. Instead of making a dramatic escape into the night, he is trapped almost in place, struggling helplessly while the police move in and seize him. Mordecai Smith gives up. Jonathan Small is captured, and there on the deck of the Aurora sits the heavy chest everyone has been chasing, the Agra treasure. Before Small gives his side of the story, Watson is sent to deliver the iron chest to Mary Morstan. For years, Mary has lived with uncertainty, loss, and unanswered questions. Now the fortune her father was denied is sitting right in front of her, large enough to transform her entire life. But Mary does not react the way Watson expects. She is calm, almost distant. The money matters far less to her than the truth. And for Watson, who has already fallen deeply in love with her, that calmness only makes her more admirable. Then they open the chest and find nothing. The Agra treasure is gone. The iron box that caused years of secrecy, betrayal, murder, and obsession is completely empty. Jonathan Small soon explains why. During the chase on the Thames, when he realized he was being cornered, he threw the jewels into the river one by one. Partly from rage, partly from revenge, and partly from the bitter logic of a man who had spent his life chasing a fortune that had destroyed everyone around it. If he could not have the treasure, then no one would. Small then tells the full story behind the Sign of 4. Years earlier in India, he and 3 men, Muhammad Singh, Abdullah Khan, and Dost Akbar, became involved in a violent crime during a time of chaos and rebellion. Together, they took possession of the Agra treasure and hid it, binding themselves with a secret pact. They became the original Sign of 4, but they were caught, convicted, and sent to the prison settlement in the Andaman Islands. There, Small made a desperate bargain. He revealed the secret of the treasure to 2 British officers, Major Sholto and Captain Morstan. If they helped him and the others escape, the treasure would be divided among them all. That was the agreement. But greed, as usual, got there first. Major Sholto went to confirm the location of the treasure. Instead of honoring the bargain, he took it for himself and fled back to England. Morstan was left out. Small and the other prisoners were abandoned. And from that betrayal, everything else followed. Morstan's disappearance, Sholto's fear, the anonymous pearls, Bartholomew's death, and the chase down the Thames. By the time Small finally reached England, Major Sholto was already dying. Worse still, Small had no idea where the treasure had been hidden. So he spent years watching the Sholto family, waiting for someone to lead him back to it. When Bartholomew finally discovered the hiding place, Small moved into action. Small insists that he never meant for Bartholomew Sholto to die. Small claimed that he wanted the treasure returned to the surviving members of the original Sign of Four, the men who had risked everything for it decades earlier. But Tonga, his companion, acted before Small could stop him and killed Bartholomew with a poisoned dart. That one sudden act turned a robbery into murder. For Holmes, the confession confirms nearly everything he had already worked out. His chain of reasoning was almost perfect. Almost. There was one small correction. Small had brought his own rope to enter the house rather than using one already there. Holmes accepts the detail with the quiet annoyance of a man who dislikes being even slightly wrong. But the larger truth is darker than any single clue. The Agra treasure was supposed to bring freedom, wealth, and power. Instead, everyone who touched it was pulled into ruin. And in the end, the treasure itself vanished into the black water of the Thames. All that suffering for an empty box. But for Watson, that empty box changes everything. If Mary had become a great heiress overnight, Watson would have felt he had no right to speak. He would have worried that his feelings looked like ambition. But now the treasure is gone, and the distance between them disappears with it. Mary is no longer a woman separated from him by a fortune. She is simply Mary, the woman he loves. So Watson finally says what he has been trying not to say since the moment she walked into Baker Street. He tells her how he feels, and Mary accepts. After everything else that happened, Watson somehow walks away with the best prize of all, a fiancé. For Watson, life is moving forward into love and marriage. For Sherlock Holmes, the world has become quiet again. Too quiet. Back at Baker Street, the great detective returns to his armchair, facing the one enemy no criminal has ever managed to defeat for long, his own crushing boredom. And once again, his hand reaches toward the dangerous 7% solution. So ends the Sign of Four. And that wraps up this episode of the Sherlock Holmes Files. If you enjoyed this mystery breakdown, stay with us for the next case. Because in Baker Street, peace never lasts very long.